It's simple, but it is a good way to go.
Mm-hmm. Don't even miss
Let's get into it. 1, 2, 3.
Why, hello, and welcome to My Whiskey Den, your favorite public access whiskey review show where craft whiskey is king. Tonight we have Alan Bishop back with us. Today we're going to be talking about all sorts of fun things and kind of, I don't want to say like a guideline for distilleries, but they are definitely rules to pay attention to as you're going forward in the industry. So thank you, Alan, for being with us. I just downed another thing, but I'm going to jump into a Spirits of French Lick, Lee Sinclair. It's an old one, and it's 56% alcohol. So I'm going to have a little bit from you. Mike, Mitch, how are you guys doing?
Good. How are you, Patrick?
I'm doing well. Mike, you're in an anonymous location this evening?
No, I'm in Molesto, California. It's not anonymous. Staying at the DoubleTree.
All right. Well, excellent. Is your computer working well enough that you want to tell people about the Bar Cart Co-op, or do you think that's something I should do this evening?
I'll give it a go. We'll see what happens.
All right. I'll let my hand. Give him the magic.
All right. As Pat mentioned, we are proud members of the Bar Cart Co-op, which is a collection of friends who create content for the whiskey and other distilled spirits public. The Bar Cart Co-op YouTube and Facebook pages have information about upcoming and past special shows, which happen about every quarter. There are blind tastings, distiller panels, discussions of special collaborations, and the usage of unique grades. Bar Cart Co-op has educational and fun episodes for your enjoyment. The oldest in the group is Distillers Talk with Alan and Christy Atkinson. It's conversation with people from distilleries and distillery adjacent, getting into the weeds with their interviews, with new episodes arriving at the end of the work week. And if that one is not nerdy enough, sign up for One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. This is the show where Alan answers any questions about distilling and puts them to the test, which could be individual grains, mash bills, equipment, and methodology. And new episodes come out randomly, so subscribe to get all of those. We also have the classiest and sexiest of the bunch, which is Bourbon Turntable. They mix the love of music with the love of whiskey. Kevin and Drew have a conversation with musicians, writers, distillery folks, and common folks like us about music and whiskey. It releases every Wednesday on all your platforms, including YouTube. And Alan also has If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything, which I say it's a show about spirits and paranormal among us, as well as the unexplained and the spiritual. How would you describe it, Alan?
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit it head on there, man. It's just high strangeness and Fortean and weirdness, and then sometimes we tie in the distilled spirits world into it. So,
all right. And lastly, but not leastly, but the newest, is the Whiskey Ring podcast. And you'll learn more about this in a couple weeks when David Levine will be on as our guest, and we will discuss his podcast and his history and get to learn a little bit more about him.
Mm-hmm.
Glad to see the Whiskey Ring on there too. That's awesome. David's good people. And
he just had his first barrel pick, and I think they're still available to get it. And it is a Jack Daniel's one. So it's
Jack Daniel's single barrel rye.
Yes, it is kind of interesting. So I was going to say that's definitely one to take a look at, because I say, and I think we agree, that Jack Daniel's single barrel products are probably some of the most underrated and fairly priced that are out there.
And you guys know how I am. I don't get in on any of that shit, but I'm buying one of those. It's happening. That's like the one time you're ever going to hear me say that ever. So
yeah, I don't see single barrel rye on the shelf, single barrel proof rye, on the shelf ever.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's one I want to try to get.
Mike, I have a question real quick, buddy.
Yep.
What did she charge to dress up as Maddie Gladden?
well, luckily, it's funny you say that because I finally watched TV in the hotel room the other day, and there's like 4 HBOs, and on 2 of them at staggered times, leaving Las Vegas. so I got to see Elizabeth Shue twice, and that is not a bad night.
Real switch hitter night there.
Yeah, it was a barn burner. It beat last night because whoever rented out basically the entire floor that I'm on for a wedding, I am glad they're gone. These we're past 5 minutes. These assholes were up from a little before midnight until about 4 o'clock this morning arguing. I feel sorry for whoever married into this piece of shit family, but I could not get any sleep. I learned more about these ass clowns than I ever wanted to know. And I only got 3 words out when I got back to the hotel today. I said, "Hey, I'm up on the 10th floor," and she goes, "They're gone."
Can you make change for $1?
Well, I'm glad everyone is here tonight because an article came out last week about a distillery in Texas having to close. And you, Alan, kind of, I don't want to say had like a rebuttal article, but a reply and kind of a few list of things that you felt were important in, I would say, maintaining or even having a distillery right now. Would that be a fair assessment? Or how did it go through your mind when you read that, I should say?
I don't know. It's all impulse shit. It just happens. It just flies out there, and then I'm like, what have you done? Let me be the first one to say that, like, when it comes to this conversation, like, I'm probably not the best person to talk to because I don't own anything. But in the 10 years I've been in the industry, I've seen some things I see that are fairly common, right? And that's what that list was. That was a list of, like, I could have easily turned that around and made it a different list of, like, here's 10 guaranteed ways to fuck up your distillery, right? And it still would have read the same way. But again, just for fairness, I don't own anything. So I am just a distiller, working for a distillery. But these are things that I see. And what I tend to see more than anything, because at this point, I don't remember what I wrote on the list, is that people just drop the fucking ball. Even if they do great for a while, they just drop the ball, especially in the craft distilling industry. They think they get to a point, they've arrived, and then somehow miraculously the product sells itself. It doesn't work that way at all. So,
and that is true. But I do have a copy of the list, which is wonderful.
Super handy.
Of course you do.
Well, actually, you can. Oh, hey!
Hold on.
Hey.
Hold on.
There's a super handy.
Hey, well, when you've got that good looking of a gentleman there, like, I don't know what you do.
You gotta get that leg up in the air and get that leverage going.
That's right.
Where was this from, Mitch? Where did that photo come from?
That was from Colors of Courage, the fundraiser that Morgan spoke at, that Kevin and several other folks kindly donated bottles to. That's
she must not have seen
she
that
wasn't
one.
there for that. So yeah, it was a great evening. Morgan spoke. It was gorgeous. It was on Facebook. If you'd like to check out Colors of Courage on Facebook, see my girlfriend talk. Bourbon Pool went over so well that it sold out immediately. Then they brought out more bottles and it sold out immediately. And then when they went and were like, hey, this is a fundraiser, we'd appreciate it if you donated more money, people literally shouted, open the bourbon pool. and they're like, we don't have any more, guys. So, like,
that's awesome.
Thanks to everyone who did donate.
Oh, excellent. And I'm glad it looked like you and everyone else there had a good time as well, too. So,
yeah, I know I look incredibly intoxicated there, but it was just Kevin's good looks. I only had 2 drinks.
He had a flower in his mouth. I mean,
honestly, I thought we were taking a serious picture, and then he put it in his mouth, and I was like, we are not taking a serious picture now.
Took a hard left at Pepe Le Pew land for sure.
Right. You know how Kevin likes to tango.
I didn't, but I found out.
Get a couple drinks in him. He's not shy about that.
Just light on his feet. All right, here. So I'm I think Mike can see that, and that was a good picture, though. But yeah, it was a good evening. But I'm going to spin us back around to number one. Distillers have to be very well capitalized to succeed. Everything is expensive, and the devaluation of equipment, as well as buying high-quality ingredients and barrels, will eat you. And the first part, I mean, especially if you're starting off at a new one, judging by how much everything has gone up recently with the housing market and other things, I could only imagine trying to open a distillery now prior to even, say, 6 to 8 years ago. I think it would have to be 3 to 4 times more expensive, maybe. Just for the still, I think maybe at least double for the still. I don't know. It seems, I would think, to be a significant jump recently.
So, yeah, I think that to some larger degree, that's probably the case, especially with materials. Now, there are some other options now, too. Obviously, there's some cheaper stills that you can buy, right? But the second part of that conversation is, the devaluation of the actual equipment itself. So, like, how cheap can you afford to go and still make quality spirits? Which, don't get me wrong, I've made just as good a spirit off of a keg still as I ever have a Vendome still, and I love Vendome too. But but then there's that perception of quality that people have when they come into your facility as well, right? They're going to look at your still and take you seriously. And maybe if you have an established distiller in your company, then possibly yes. But otherwise, the first thing they're going to say is, well, why don't you have a Vendome still, right? Or why don't you have a Carl or Forsyth or whatever? So you can definitely buy equipment much cheaper, but there's a perception to that too. And maybe that matters and maybe it doesn't, depending on what you're trying to do, because a big part of what I was trying to get across in all 10 of these points is there's really only 2 routes left, either extremely small and regional or extremely, extremely large. I really don't think that there's middle ground anymore. I think that there could be if some of the categories open up some, but if you're going into this and you're just thinking you're going to make bourbon and you're going to hit that middle ground, you will die a slow death, in my opinion.
So you come into something we've talked about in the past is almost going the way of beer, of being, I don't want to, hyper regional, where
yes,
you're trying to cut out a piece of your own territory in a state. Not to say someone else might not be there, but you're always trying to expand it and go further. But you have your core section or a chunk of it that people will be coming to, and you've carved it out. And we'll get to one of the other ones, but he said, base it around, there's still around something or an attraction, and to help bring people in. But
before I even get to the hyper regionalized thing, the other part of that is the being well capitalized part, right? So a lot of people go into this and they, you don't have to have $1 million+ to start a distillery. It certainly makes it much easier. But whether you're on the large side or the small side, a lot of people get into this and they way underfigure what they think they're going to have in it. And so maybe they have the money to actually get it up and get it started, but then they don't have the money to continue. I mean, if you're putting anything in a new oak barrel right now, I can tell you that, if you're just looking at 8-9 month old staves, you're still looking at, $300+ a barrel. And if you want good staves, you're going to pay almost $600 a barrel for it right now. Right. And that's if you can get it. There was one other option that we had when we were looking for 48-month air season staves here recently. They weren't being made in the US, but they were bringing them in through a company that is US based. And by the time you paid shipping from Spain, you got, almost $600 a barrel plus whatever that shipping is. I mean, that's going to eat you real quick. Right. You look at specialized ingredients, right? Even if you want to stay with like the hyper regional, hyper localized thing, and you're going to focus on white spirits, you can get out pretty quickly, like gin or absinthe or something like that. You want to use quality botanicals, good luck finding them in the United States. You're pretty much going to have to import those from somewhere outside the United States, and it's going to cost a lot of money to do it and do it the right way.
Mitch, thoughts on this at all?
Well, I've got 2. We'll start with the super topical one. Years ago, back when Corsair was in Bowling Green instead of in Nashville, because like they were Kentucky folks instead of Tennessee folks. I went there, but they had already opened their Nashville distillery, so all they still made here in Kentucky was like their clear spirits and their like gin and whatnot. They were talking and they were saying about their botanicals, like how expensive it was and how they could only buy in small quantities because of how expensive it was. And of course, when you buy in small quantities, like you pay more per ounce, per pound, or whatever. And they were talking about how excited they were because they finally got big enough that they could make a big enough purchase of vanilla bean that it dropped the prices. And they're like, that was our number one expense. And to me, it blew my mind, right? Because I saw them on the shelves everywhere in Louisville. And I was like, I mean, oh no, they had to spend $3,000 on vanilla beans. It's like, to me, that was just like the fact that that was a big deal to them blew my mind. The second thing is I have a book and it's almost worthless now because it was written quite a while ago, and it was how to start a how to start a distillery with $50,000. And it's a pipe dream at this point, but it was basically like rent everything, get loans, beg, borrow, and steal, and then you can start it for $50,000. So I agree, like that ain't enough money. It's enough to literally get you started to go out of business. Yeah. The only route I see if you don't have an amazing amount of capital is pulling like a Penelope or whatever that is, where you are rectifiers and you find somebody who's making amazing things. You get a great label. You find someone with a good palate. You make a blend, and you just do your ever-loving best from there, because that way you don't have to start out with all those massive capital budgets and all that fun stuff.
And be proud of it and be honest about it. And I made this joke a million times, but I don't know why no one has jumped on using the term craft rectified. You could easily define that, and it's an easy marketing term, and it's stupid that nobody's jumped on it. But one of the other capitalization problems that I've seen big time is that they don't include marketing incentives in anything. They don't include when you go into distribution. Listen, distributors, and everybody has to have them, are fucking gangsters. That's what they are. They want their money, and they'll get their money. And if they don't get their money, you won't play the game, right? And that doesn't get included in your startup costs when you're thinking that through. Nobody thinks that part of it through. The other part of it is what happens when you start up. Even if you get rolling and you're doing okay, when you have an equipment problem, right? Because this is all highly specialized equipment. You can't just hire whoever to come in, and even if there's nothing wrong with the equipment, just needs a modification. Are you just going to hire Joe the welder from down the street to come do that modification, or do you want somebody who's going to actually guarantee their fucking work and make sure that it actually works the right way? Because that costs a lot of money. And how many of those guys actually have mobile welding equipment? And mobile welding is not cheap. Those are all things that nobody takes into account. They just take into account the bare minimum, the bare bones of what they need to get started, and they think they'll do okay off of that. And I've seen that twice now in two different places where that goes south pretty easily. So
if you don't have the slush emergency fund, like you're talking about, like that's something that when you start, you're supposed to have, because same thing with like life, shit's going to happen. And I get maybe some of the things you mentioned, not knowing maybe not even knowing who the mobile welder is, and that taking 5 days to find out and get them just to come look at it. Yeah. Could be a huge issue. So just knowing who to call in those instances, but having some of that set aside would be kind of like a basic, like the emergency contacts. That list is here. Hey, how much is one of your calls? Give them up. But let's talk about it. You're probably going to come out here, and let's be on friendly terms rather than being frustrated with each other. So start the relationship early.
Exactly. So. The other one that I was going to throw in there too is like if they, you set out, and I've seen this. I've been on both sides of it. If you guys think about it, in the two distilleries I've worked in, right, I've seen kind of both sides of it. I've seen a well-capitalized distillery that, in my opinion, didn't pay anywhere near enough attention to quality, and I've seen a much less well-capitalized distillery that pays plenty of attention to quality because they allow the distiller to do his job as far as quality goes, but they don't pay enough attention to the marketing, right? And you can't go too far either direction. Clearly, that other distillery, the first one, sold before the owners intended to sell it. Absolutely sold before it ever got to the point where it could be really well capitalized for what it was at the time, and sold during COVID because they didn't have enough money left over to keep it running, basically, and they had to. They didn't have any choice. But one thing they don't include on the side without the marketing is, working in, all right, so you have your employees that are going to be there. You have your distiller, your assistant distiller, your mash man, whatever, right? But including the salary for whoever your salesperson is going to be. If you're going to be a multi-state company, you better have a salesperson, and it better be a good salesperson. And a good salesperson, just like the welder, costs money, right? You're going to pay, honestly, for somebody that's really going to pull their weight, you're going to pay more for them than you will any distiller, no matter how much that distiller knows.
That's sad.
So
I'm go ahead, Mitch. Sorry.
I was going to say, so part of the whiskey marketing school, and when they talk, it's very much like, hey guys, like some of y'all would like to be involved in this business, and y'all need to understand it is a business. It is not, fun times every day doing what you believe in. You have to run a business, and if you can't run a business, you're just a very good distiller. You should not open a distillery. You should work for someone. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, what's going to happen to a lot of craft distillers is there's going to be absolutely amazing distillers who go out of business because they suck at business. And there's going to be absolutely great businessmen that go out of business because they suck at distilling. And you have to find somewhere in that middle ground. And it's it's hard. And it's, it costs money to be a good distiller, and it costs money to be a good businessman. So it makes sense when people try to lean one way or the other.
Yeah, you have to cover all those bases, and and the thing is, even if you're covering all those bases, like you have to stay on it all the time. There's no way not to stay on it, even if you're at the point where you're everybody's thing and you're in 50 states. If you get that big, right? If you want to go to the big side, you can't just back off of it once you get to that point, because these other places, especially the ones that are expanding, the big distilleries, they're going to do exactly what the Whiskey Trust did before Prohibition. When everything comes down to it and those foreign markets don't grow the way that they think they're going to eat everyone. And they don't even have to buy them to put them out of business. All they got to do is go, hey, we got a big surplus, time to start dropping prices. And that's all they have to do.
And that's, in my mind, that's what most of them have been preparing themselves to do recently. Mm-hmm. How many new distilleries have you seen go up where you're not necessarily closing the other one, and no statement in that? It's just we're opening another one too, and that scale is a lot in my mind. But like you said, that's what I was afraid might happen at some point, is you might push back. Look at Buffalo Trace. We don't have enough booze, but we have a whole nother section of special antiques we're going to release this year, but we don't have enough booze. But we came up with a whole new lineup.
So even on the small side, so like I said, so you can and this is all part of the planning. It's not necessarily capitalization with money, but it can be to some degree, right? But there are options. Again, I mentioned there's some cheaper stills out there you can get, and honestly, they're good enough stills. Truthfully, and you can afford to buy these in such a way that you could even have an extra if you wanted it, so you could switch out parts or whatever you needed to do, right? Because sometimes even getting people to work on them, because they're not guaranteed by anybody in the U.S., is nearly impossible, right? But there are some options, and there's some really cool stuff going on out there. Like we focused on this on Distiller's Talk before, but there's a place called Inbox Beverage, right? And if you want a small local regionalized thing, and you had a tourist attraction you could put it next to, they will sell you a distillery and a shipping container built to your specifications with the still, the mash tun, the fermenters, the whole thing. You drop it, as long as you have electricity, you have all your codes passed and all that stuff, you're good to go. And it's a fairly cheap way to get into it. And starting there is not a bad idea, right? It's what Corsair kind of had in mind, but that idea didn't really exist in that sort of way at that time. So I think there's ways that this can be approached. And I think, again, not focusing on bourbon in particular will help out most of the people that are going into this, without a doubt.
It's all about return on investment, right? Mm-hmm. Like, time is money, and getting that turnaround and things that'll sell is incredibly paramount, because
Right.
without being too, jaded, sourcing vodka and then making a lot of vodka drinks in your, tasting room / bar, if you can, is a great way to make a lot of money, because suddenly that vodka bottle that, you would have had to spend whatever amount because, it would be your call or whatever vodka costs the same as a well vodka for you. So you're making that extra how much per drink?
Right. Well, and some of this too with some of these ideas also falls into, the argument I've been making for certain types of distillers to also be offered ownership in companies. And I say this because part of your capitalization should be, you should have a good distiller. Don't skimp on your distiller. Of all things, that's the last thing you want to skimp on. Find somebody that knows what the hell they're doing. Now, they may not necessarily know the equipment that you have, and they may not have ever worked on that scale, but you think about capitalization, how much money does it cost for R&D, right? You want something flavored and you reach out to Moonshine University, and I don't mean this as a knock against them or anybody in that industry. How much is that going to cost you versus somebody who's been doing this for a long time, whether they did it on a hobby level or they've done it on a professional level, that really knows what they're doing? What is that worth, and what does that save you in R&D costs alone to hire that person?
I know that's definitely a road I'd be going. I would go into, because you'd always want someone who would have some form of expertise beforehand.
Right. And then send them to boiler school, because nobody really understands boilers, even the people that teach fucking boiler school.
That's
I don't even want to talk about.
Right.
There are stories of somewhere I used to work of people of a supervisor being called to the boiler room, walking in, getting so freaked out he immediately hit the e-stop and ran all the way across the entire distillery and continued down the street.
Wow. Holy hell.
So, yeah, I don't like boilers.
They can be a little scary, but that's, you got, like you said, that's an important part. And every person I've added that's been at a distillery has mentioned that very same thing. So, I mean, it's an important part. So, all right, we're going to jump to number 2, because I don't want to keep Alan and everyone here up all night. So we're going to at least get to number 2.
Yeah, I'll fucking ramble all night. You know how I am.
That's okay. Well, we got to have another drink. Keep everyone in the chat sipping on it too. So, number 2. Oh, this kind of jumped into this beforehand. Either stay small and regional and master social media and get the gatekeepers of the industry talking about you, how special you are, or pay a damn good sales and marketing force. Okay, basically, we were just talking about this whole thing right now, kind of rolled into this. But what we weren't talking about, I'd say, like you said, some social media gatekeepers. It does place a factor in a lot of the worlds. Of just getting your name out with a good couple places, it can make a significant difference. I'm sure you saw a spike on a few things where you saw a review someplace, and all of a sudden the next day you're getting calls and questions and other things, especially depending upon whose show you're on.
Well, and that's twofold. So I use the word gatekeeper because, most of the people are not as, in our not immediate circle, but our further out circle, they're not as dorky as what we are, right? So when I say gatekeeper, here's what I'll really say. It's not just the Fred Minnix, Mike Beaches, etc. of the world, right? It, like, our success started with you guys and Kevin and Steve Coombs, and I've known Steve for a very long time, right? If it wasn't for you guys and some of the other podcasts we've been on putting the word out about what Spirits of French Lick was doing, no amount of anything that we did would have ever have reached those other names that have bigger audiences that can draw in the more common bourbon drinker, right? Yes, absolutely. But that never would have happened. But honestly, if you are not going to spend the money on marketing to get their attention, then you better be spending time on quality and making sure that enough people are talking about them that they have no choice but to pay some attention to what you're doing. And then once they see it, if it's good or if they put their stamp of approval for whatever that's worth on it, it certainly hits the gas pedal. Now, where we lucked out with Spirits of French Lick was that it wasn't really lucking out. It's because I've got a big mouth and I run it a lot on the internet, and it is what it is. And I'm not afraid to go on podcasts. I'm not afraid to talk about what we do and how what we do is unique and why it's unique, etc. And yes, there are others like that, but we were already in place doing that before COVID ever hit, right? Mm-hmm. All these other companies, even the ones that were spending millions of dollars on marketing, they had to switch gears to do that. We had already figured out how to play that game. I mean, you know, and some of it was accidental. If you go back and you look at the unpretentious thing, and I made the joke about the secondary market, that turned into fucking viral marketing real quick.
Okay.
And it wasn't even on purpose.
I kind of helped spurn that at one point because I did say, I joked and I was like, oh, I heard one of them was going for like 1175 in this one group, and I had like 4 people write me about it and question if that was true, if there was still a bottle, and I was like, yeah, you're gonna have to go in the group and find out.
But sometimes that snarky thing works, right? And sometimes the online marketing works as long as it's handled in such a way, like if you're going to be on the smaller side, right, you got to be able to interact with the people. The people want to interact with distillers. And for as important as the festivals are and people meeting you at festivals, or as important as the tours are, you know, it's just as important to do the podcast and those sort of things. And even on nights where there's not very many people watching and or listening, the thing about it is all of them can be listened to again. And I've noticed there's certain shows where you'll see like the live count's pretty low, but you go back a week later and you see how many people really watched it and how it builds up over time. And here's the beauty of it. If even only 70 people watch it, but those 70 people watch all of it, that's 70 people that are likely to buy your product. And it's 70 people that are going to spread the word to their friends, or they're going to come and get bottles from you and send out samples for you, right? That's how you build that up slowly over time. Now, again, you have to be careful when we're talking about the size thing. So you either stay small and regional or you go extremely large. Again, you don't want to get to that middle ground. That middle ground becomes problematic. You spend as little time there as what you possibly can, for sure.
All right, here, and we're going to go right into 3-2. Be able to turn on a dime as trends change, your passion and core matters only so long as you can pay for them. And
right. With no period at the end, because my grammar is amazing.
Instead of Dickens, I'll leave that go. No, but and I had someone almost instantaneously as I posted this comment on it, and the comment was about how if you're aging things, it's hard to turn on a dime because you're putting years in the barrel. And I pointed out, and the thing is you could be aging something. Coming up, you could, when it comes to fruition, you could know that you have 3 different barrels you want to put it in because they're kind of the hot thing for finishing. Or there are so many things you could create in under a year that need absolutely no finishing time, or under a year finishing time in a barrel to create them. You can turn a focus really quick. You can add a product line or a SKU that you didn't have that could make a significant difference for the distillery or bar as far as selling it, because a lot of them have, bar, restaurant, distillery, all kind of attached to one thing now for revenue streams.
Well, part of that's just understanding the capacity of your distillery, right? And being able to, you have to be able to quote unquote forecast. Well, nobody can really forecast. If bourbon is not going to be the thing for craft distillers anymore, it becomes much harder to forecast what a larger market's going to want over time. However, you hopefully plan your distillery, whether you're on the small side or the larger side, to have extra capacity, right? And then that allows you to fit in days that you don't have to grind out whatever your flagship product is, and you can do some experiments and stuff. So I always knew from the get-go Spirits of French Lick was a 10 to 20 state distillery as far as capacity goes. 20 on the high side, right? And that's if everything's like going really, really well. 20 states, would eat just about everything that you had, but we've always stayed around that kind of 15 state sort of thing. And that was done on purpose so that I could produce enough for the bonded product, enough of the white spirit to go out into the market, enough for single barrels, and then actually have some overrun so that we could start selling some barrels wholesale into the marketplace, which is a whole nother story that a lot of craft distillers miss out on, especially right now. MGP barrel sales are low as far as pricing goes right now. So if you have weird stuff because everybody's tired of MGP, you can move some craft barrels in the market right now for a premium price that MGP is not touching. Without a doubt, or even on secondary going through a broker, MGP is not getting close to those prices. So you just have to work it in, right? And you have to say, well, who knows when you start off what's going to actually take off and what's going to actually work. You can look at the trends all you want to. So we made a whole bunch of aquavit when we started, a whole bunch of aquavit. They won't have to make aquavit at Spirits of French Lick for like 20 years, guaranteed, right? It catches on for a couple months at a time. It becomes a thing, almost becomes a thing, and then something always kills it off, right? I'm glad that we have it. It certainly paid some light bills from time to time, and it wasn't terribly expensive to make. But the rest of it is just variations on what you do every day, right? Do you really need every barrel in your warehouse to be the same mash bill or even the same 3 mash bills? Or do you want to occasionally have, a random lot of 12 barrels that are off and different and more unique and so easier to sell as a guaranteed single barrel? You guarantee we'll sell them as a single barrel. There's no way around that. People are interested in those things that are weird and off and different that they can't get elsewhere. But the demographic is changing as far as drinking too. Most younger drinkers nowadays are not so set in, I'm a bourbon person or I'm a rye person, if there are even rye people out there at this point. But, they're more than willing to try pretty much anything you put in front of them. And if they like one of your products, here's the thing. It's very hard to capture one of the younger drinkers, anybody below 30 at this point, with a product. Okay. But if you can capture their attention with a product and you have a whole bunch of other products, they'll support those other products. They may not drink the same thing every time, but they might drink the same brand most of the time.
Oops. Sorry, almost lost something there, but I did. Caught it.
Kind of a long roundabout way of saying all that shit, I guess. But yeah.
No, that's good. Hold on here. I'm gonna roll us into 4. Mitch and you guys have been quiet up there. You got your top and bottom corners. You can say something. I did hear the sirens going by. I was concerned for your safety for a second there.
I'm good.
But then play the game. Distributors will demand incentives. Pay the damn things and be over with it, or find ways to legally game the system. I'm intrigued by the last one about legally game the system. But you know what? Like you were saying in the setup of what you're doing, that's almost a business cost that you should have factored in.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's all part of the same thing. Also, the word legally probably should add quotation marks around it, but
well, fine, we'll put them in there.
But there's always gray areas that people can play off of, right? So like a legal way of gaming the system would be, the online distributors that work out of certain places, and they can move things that you ordinarily wouldn't be able to move, including samples, right? So you got to have a distributor to get a sample to your liquor stores, etc. Find one of these online distributors, work with them and work closely with them, or build the fan base again, right? So here's the legal quotation marks. It's not that the distillery is doing anything that's uncouth. Customers that are also fans and friends, they'll get a bottle and then they'll go, well, I don't have this in my liquor store. I'm gonna, take and put this in sample bottles and take it around to the liquor stores, right? But you got to be able to build that up. And again, that goes back to the online marketing and making that audience and building that audience so that they'll want to do those things for you and help you out.
So I accidentally did that. I ran into a different Alan who worked at Watch Hill Proper here in Louisville. And I was talking about Texas whiskey because I'd just gotten back from Texas and brought back, all these bottles that I bought because self-control is not necessarily one of my strong points. And I was like, yeah, man, he's like, come on up, bring some and we'll taste it. So I brought every bottle of fucking Texas whiskey I had, which was, 4 cases. Showed up and was like, all right, you ready to try this? And he's like, holy shit, that was not what I thought was going to happen. But he brought one of the owners out and I was like, let's try some Texas whiskey, man. And he's like, I like Kentucky bourbon, Texas whiskey it's very woody, it's very young. And I was like, yeah, you're not wrong on 85% of it, but that 15% is holy crap good.
Yep.
And he tried Iron Root Tri-Barrel Blend from like 2020, and he tried to buy the bottle from me, like half empty. And I was like, you can have more to drink, but there's no effing way I'm letting you have this bottle.
Yep.
But so like I was accidentally a brand rep for Iron Root in Kentucky when all they distributed in Kentucky was, through whatchamacallit, Total Wine. So like it happens. It happens on accident. Like once you build those relationships and put something out that people want to talk about, they will.
It happens on accident, and then it also happens on purpose too, which is a cool thing. So like, people who are already tangentially tied to the industry in some way. So, Indiana was a late adopter for us. I mean, we could have spent tons and tons of marketing money in Indiana if we'd had it to do that. But we didn't have to because we had so many fans in other states, and most of them were tied to either bourbon clubs, and they just happened to travel through our big fucking tourist attraction that we're attached to, right? And just came through and tried our stuff and carried stuff back with them to their bourbon festival or whatever festival they had, or to their liquor store friends who knew them from the bourbon society that they were in. And then that led to single barrel after single barrel to bottled and bond after bottled and bond, right? And so that's how Texas and Louisiana, Carolinas, pretty much everywhere, that's how it started. It really started from there, to the extent that what happened was our distributors in Indiana were like, how in the fuck are these other states getting single barrels and why aren't we getting them? Because now you guys are suddenly selling shit and we're not getting a piece of it, right? And then that made them step up their game big time. Literally the fans doing that is what caused Indiana and our distributor in Indiana to pay attention and jump on the horse.
Sad, but
right.
More on the subject that came up a while ago from Tom.
Yep, absolutely. I agree. And unfortunately, that's one of those things here in the state of Indiana that I think we've still got a number of years of working on. We're still dealing with a very prohibition era mindset with a lot of people in state government. It's getting better. And I think it's going to start getting some more attention as we move forward with the Indiana Distillers Guild, which is finally seemingly happening. We've had it. This is now the third try at this, but we've had 2 meetings that people have shown up to in a row. So I'm hopeful for it. There is a cool documentary about the distilling history of Indiana and the distilling future of Indiana coming out through some IU filmmakers. I think that'll help get some. Are you getting that plastic bag ready to strangle her with, or what?
Yeah, I didn't know what was going on. The lights got dim, and
it wasn't me. I don't have any plastic bags. It'd be on my head if I had one. So I was having this conversation about distributors Saturday when I met up with Chris Koenig, and talking about the struggle of trying to get distributors to work. Like he had a distributor across the parking lot from his distillery who's like, "Oh, I'll carry your stuff." It didn't work out, And I was telling him, Gary Heingardner kept saying, because I told him, where I'm at, I'm just a couple blocks from the Missouri-Kansas state line, and I can get more wood hat in Kansas, or I get more wood hat products in Kansas than I can in any liquor store in Missouri. And which is just ridiculous. And it's all went down to distributors. And Gary just kept saying, they got that contact form on there. You got to call them up and you got to use that contact form and you got to push them. It's like, I get it, but they're not going to listen to one person. I do understand it is one of those things, just like, hey, you want to make change, get out and vote. But You've got to get so many people to push these people. And even then, they probably won't. I think it would have to come more from the liquor stores telling people you need to carry this stuff. But how do you get a product into a liquor store? Maybe that's the gray area, where you take one in there, because that's like taking a bottle into a distillery that doesn't belong to the distillery. It's like you got to get them to try it to have them say, "Oh, hey, I want to try this." And Gary finally, I know he switched his distributors, and it has improved, but it's still crazy because even if a distributor did decide to carry it, they're only going to put it in certain places anyway. They're not going to go to every store and try to sell
No.
it every store. They want to get rid of it.
Yeah, and you as a craft distiller in particular, you don't want to be in every store. You want to be in the stores that make sense.
Yeah.
You know, that's another thing that I left out of this too that people forget or they get lazy about. So a distiller, as long as they're with a distributor, can, you know, you can obviously go into the liquor store and present to the liquor store, present to liquor co-ops. Fucking, I did a ton of that for the first 5 years. Distillery owners and potentially distillers, if they're being paid on the right kind of scale, as far as potential sweat equity and that sort of thing that makes them want to put things into that business, they should be out doing that at least 1 day a week and not give it up. But you have to also have that sales force we talked about earlier, because not only going in and pitching, because getting into the store is one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Staying in that store is another thing, and going and doing signings or going and doing talks or seeing if they want single barrels, or sometimes you got to make a deal with the people that you're dealing with. Like there's chains that you go to and you pitch to them and they might really like your product, but they don't need your product. So how do you sweeten the pot? I've done this a few times. And I figured this shit out on accident. So what you do is you go, listen, I will sell you a single. Here's where that turning on a dime thing comes in handy. I will sell you a single barrel of some shit that we've never released that's not going anywhere else, right? If that's what it takes to get into your store and that's what you need, that's what I will do, because it's necessary, right? And that you got to play that game with them. There's no way around that game. There just really isn't. It's not always a fun game. And I can tell you that being out on the road and pitching, God, going into a fucking mom and pop store is the worst, because they don't fucking care, period. That is the worst. And again, you don't want to be there anyways. What's your bottle going to do in the mom and pop store? Unless it's in your hometown, it's going to sit there and collect dust. That's all it's ever going to do. So you can be in all those accounts, and on the big side or the bigger side, you'll see that some distilleries have done that. They would just load up distribution and all the distribution markets and all the warehouses with all the product they could, because they knew they were going to try to flip the place quickly, right? But for an actual distillery trying to make money and trying to get going and trying to be serious in the game, you don't want to do that. What you do want to see, though, is the other part of that goes back to social media, making those friends, having those supporters, and being able to like go on whatever social media platform you're on, whether it's Facebook or Instagram, whatever you're into, right? Flipping through, and within a few flips, seeing one of your products or someone talking about one of your products or talking about your distillery, unrelated to anything that you have posted, just of their own accord, then you know you're on the right path. Because if that's in your feed, it's in a whole bunch of other people's feed too, right? I still do that every day. That's one of the things I look at every day. It's not like an official metric. I don't have a number for it or anything. But if I can do that, I've got a pretty good idea that people are still keeping us in mind. So
it's fair. Oh, wait, hold on. That kind of was rolling right into number 5. Take the time to turn customers into friends and friends into advocates. A free shirt goes a lot further than an expensive billboard. That is a serious, it sounds dumb, but for how much you would pay for a billboard, ponder how many t-shirts and hats you could hand out or give out. And that's something when I pay attention, I love t-shirts. And I like hats, and I love seeing what's on them. I'm like, oh, hey, that's interesting. That's witty. Who is that? What the hell is that? So and that's one of my main goals when I go on vacation, is to pick up shirts of places I've been. You know, like it reminds me of stuff I did. So I like that refresher in my brain. So having that out and about in what could be multiple states rather than a billboard, which is probably within inside of 10 to 15 miles of maybe 30 miles of your own business. I don't know. I think that is infinitely a much better use of money.
it is, and especially if you can work the marketing in, you know, and when I say marketing, I don't mean like necessarily paying a marketing team, but like just being smart with what you do. Jolie was really, really good at that, obviously. At Spirits of French Lick, and I could say some snarky shit to her, and then she would turn it into a thing that actually worked with the brand, right? So how that worked, I don't know, but it did. But being able to play off of all those things, you know, like the Spirits of French Lick thing, it's not just the spirits in the bottle, it's the spirits of the place. And then, you know, even having those labels on t-shirts, stuff like that. it works extremely well as long as your design is good and your story is good, and the story is pretty easily interpreted by seeing an image, right? And billboards make sense if you're, like you said, within a couple miles of town. But for example, when we first started, I remember the previous owner, who's since retired, I guess he's still an owner, but he was determined that we had to have billboards on like I-64 and I-65 down by Louisville and everything. I'm like, it's not going to do you any good. Like, if people are coming to town here, they're coming because there's a casino here, right? The distillery is just going to be like a day bonus for them. They're going to see that there's a distillery in town and they're going to come to that distillery. So why are you going to spend the money to try to actually drive the traffic to the distillery from Louisville, where they have plenty of distilleries to visit? You're not going to get anybody off of that. It's not going to work. You're going to spend a ton of money on that for no reason that could be spent on things that actually do work. And the t-shirts do work. Hats work. Swag works. People like shit that they use. You know what I mean? I don't know if all the swag works. We had some stupid cleaning rags at Copper and Kings, and I'm pretty sure everybody just threw those in the trash because nobody wants a fucking cleaning rag.
That's not the memory you want to bring up from a distillery.
You're supposed to like hang it out of your pocket like it was your gang colors or some shit.
Oh, I was thinking like you fucked something up and they made you clean some of the stills that day or something. Like
Right.
You forgot to pay for your dinner and all of a sudden you got put to work. Yeah, you got the samples, but you didn't have any money, so you're going to go wash for the day.
You're not wrong. It's kind of the message it sent. It's kind of the message it sent.
Here. Number 6, identify markets that aren't well served nor served well. What gaps are there? Nowadays, there are no legitimate bourbon gaps that would keep your doors open. Yeah, that's pretty. I don't want to say bourbon's time in the sun is done.
No, not at all.
It's raised inside, but other things are starting to take a piece of the pie in the bourbon, out of the bourbon world, in my mind.
And what I mean by that is exactly this. Even if the market, even if the bubble doesn't burst, let's say, if you already have bourbons that are doing well, they're probably going to continue to do well, at least for a good little while. And if you're big enough, they're going to do really well for you, and you're going to be just fine. But trying to go into it now, there's no gap there. How do you walk into any of your big liquor stores and you go down the bourbon aisles, because it's no longer aisle, right? You walk in and it's bourbon on two sides for 3 aisles, basically, or bourbon and rye, and everyone uses the same color. They basically all use the same bottle. They all more or less have a bullshit story. They all lean into that whole rustic thing, right? How do you, when you walk into the liquor store, even figure out what bourbon you want to try if you want to try something different, short of if you're, again, informed via social media or you're a sucker for marketing, right? Then you'll fall for whatever's one of those things that piques your interest at that particular time. But you have to remember, to even get on one of those many shelves of bourbon, you got to knock somebody else off that shelf. And then knocking somebody else off of that shelf means that somebody could knock you off the shelf. So once you take that gap, you have to keep that gap. And I don't see it being real easy for anybody to get in and get a gap in there at this point with bourbon, one way, shape, form, or the other, unless they just had the money to pay for shelf space. And I'm sure that's part of the game too. It's not part of the game I've ever played because we didn't have that kind of money, but I bet it's out there. I guarantee it's out there. So, and what I mean by, so the markets that are served well and the markets that are well served, right? So bourbon is both, meaning, and this is something I learned, one of the things I learned from Joe Heron at Copper and Kings, right? You look for that gap in the market. So is it already served well? Yeah, there's more than one aisle of bourbon in the store, right? Is it already well served? Yeah, you know everything to do with bourbon, right? There's plenty of guys out there to tell you how to make whatever cocktail you want to make, whatever culture is associated with bourbon. Somebody will tell you the stories. There's festivals about it, everything else, right? What is there room for? And what is similar enough or within the parameters that you could get people to pay attention? So apple brandy for us at Spirits of French Lick is one of those gaps, right? How many real apple brandy producers are there out there that are taken seriously that make a bourbon adjacent apple brandy, right? And it's not a hard jump for a bourbon drinker to be interested in an apple brandy, but it also can attract some drinkers that are not into bourbon at all. So, and then on the serving it well part, you figure out the cocktails, you figure out all that stuff, all the information that goes with it, all the ceremonial ritual things that people do with their drinks.
And we'll get the chat's
So
opinion on this rag. There you go. You can check out that rag and you can give your opinions of what you believe that was a good decision or not.
So I will say, kind of off, or it's not necessarily off topic. Man, my brain just died in the middle of like that sentence. All right, what was I gonna say?
Yes, I'm glad it wasn't only me. That happened to me once before when we were saying something. I'm like, I wanted to correlate something, and then all of a sudden it was gone. I'm like, nope, just let it go.
I feel like Patrick and Mike are sitting over there going, you know what I thought would be a really great idea if we let Alan just come on and fucking rant for an hour.
I was going to jump in at some points here. Go ahead, Mitch.
I remembered.
Yes.
Right. So the thing I say is you're never gonna be as good of Jim Beam as Jim Beam.
Yes.
So right, like if you look and someone does it better and cheaper than you, you lost.
Yeah.
You have to in some way make it better
100%.
or cheaper, or make it appear better.
Better or cheap. Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
In some way. So you have to find that in the market is something that you can either make better, make cheaper, or make it look like you're making it better or cheaper. So there we go. Sorry. Like I was like, and then I was like, why am I thinking about Jim Beam right now? Like that's a very weird thing. Okay.
No, you're right. And so this goes back to the whole, even just pre-planning everything out, right? Like how many distilleries, guys, you guys go to distilleries quite a bit too. And I know you're seeing it. And Mitch, you probably see it more kind of in the same way that I do because of the geographic region we're in. How many of these new craft distilleries do you go to that are just doing the same 3 traditional mash bills? They all have the exact same still. They, like not just a similar still. They have the exact same still from Vendome. They have the exact same fabricated building, right? The exact same fermenters. They use the exact same source for their yeast and their enzymes. They had the exact same consultant from Moonshine University. And again, not trying to knock those guys in any way, shape, or form. How, and they're buying the exact same liquid from MGP, right? They're all doing the exact same thing. You could go to, I could think of at least 5 to 7 between Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio that look exactly the same.
Well, and I mean, okay, right. If we're getting down to like same still, okay, yes. But like if you take that out, it's
right.
It's
far more digits. Yes. But what I mean is like all the way down to the experience, right? I mean, these guys are just clones of one another. Like if somebody had enough money that they could buy them all out, they just fucking franchise one company, you know, and not have to change shit, not have to change anything.
I thought that was happening at one point when I didn't understand how like it's called distillery and I didn't know it was a bar here. And I'm like, is it a bar? Is it a distillery? It was in Wisconsin. I'm like, is it a chain? What the fuck is going on here? Like, because I couldn't figure out what's going on.
Great name for a brand, just distillery. Spell it with an H at the end for fun. Distillery.
It had me. I'm like, I don't know what the fuck.
So what's your story? We're kind of the Buckies of distilleries.
We got like 100 gas pumps out front. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
It's great.
Slushy machines.
Sushi guaranteed not to give you a stomach illness.
Yeah.
I don't know. Guarantee is a strong word.
While you're here.
Oh, you're here. You get about 30 miles down the road. That'll sink in.
At the gas station that doesn't clean their bathrooms.
No, that's one where you got to go get the key and it's attached to a hubcap. You got to bring that with you. If your family waits in the car there.
Tourist item from the quarter machine.
My favorite are the ones that are attached to used plungers. It's like, oh, thank you. That's great.
Character building.
All right. I think we're on 7 here. We'll keep going. My face is all smiley. I'm having a good time. It hurts on the cheeks right now. Don't
This is-
chase
My face hurts, Mama.
it hurts. I don't chase on premises, a slow return, and high volatile. Get the folks who drink at home.
It turns out my grammar doesn't matter that much.
Well,
Yeah.
well, how highly volatile does does that mean you could have some issues on premises with what's going on?
No, I mean in terms of how dedicated to your brand really is a bartender, right? Or is a bar owner. You know what I mean? Again, if they can get it cheaper or they think they get a better value, then what's it matter? I've seen a lot of people make this mistake, but this was one that I felt like, and granted I wasn't at Copper and Kings very long, but I think this is what caused them to sell as quickly as what they did during COVID, I suspect. They dumped millions and millions of dollars into marketing to bars, because that was the theory that Joe had, was that you had to have the bars to drive, you had to have on premise to drive off premise. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that was true 10 years ago when I started. And I certainly know it's not true now in any way, shape, or form. And so when their bar business dried up because of COVID, then the money doesn't come in, and you got to figure out what you're going to do with it. Now, I think that he always intended to sell that place, flip it one way, shape, form, the other, but I don't think he probably did it for the amount of money that he thought he would get out of it in the long run, or he did it at the time that he thought he would want to do it, is what I would say. But, as someone who's gone out on the street and had to go into accounts, I hated on-premise accounts more than anything else, because your price range on everything you have craft-wise, especially if you're pot distilled, right? And that can be a great marketing thing and great for building, that camaraderie and that friendship with people online, etc. But you're not getting anything in the well. It's never happening. None of those bars are putting anything you have in the well. It's not going to happen unless you're of a certain size and scale and you can keep that price down. And then even if you get in the well, so what's going to happen is somebody else is going to come along and get that spot, because it's obviously up for grabs, right? For the right amount of money, or the right price on the bottle, whatever. Maybe you get them to put you on the back bar. And when I say the back bar, I mean the back bar, right? Now, there are a few craft accounts out there that are different, and those are fine. Those are worth going to. Watch Hill Proper has always been good to us so far. I really like working with them, and they always put the bottles somewhere prominent, or there's always somebody on staff that can tell you about the bottles. And if they have questions, they reach out and ask about them. There are a few places like that, but for the most part, if you're a craft distiller, you're wasting your time on the on-prem thing for sure. You're better off, once again, festivals and this sort of thing, where people can talk to you and ask you questions. They can drink your product at home. They can be informed about your product at home. You want them drinking your product at home. That's what you want. You want those people to take their stuff home. They take their alcohol seriously, for better or worse, right? They're interested in the story, and they're interested in sharing that experience with other people. So, you don't need the bars if every one of your fans' homes is a bar and they have friends over and they share their stuff with their friends. That's your bar. It's their house. Mm-hmm. So,
no, that's true for most of the people we know. And you can tell by Mitch's background. That's accurate.
You would know if you'd show up.
Hey, I've been to that fucking house. Don't give me that shit. Okay. You can give Mike shit. You give someone else. I've been there, and I'll come back.
I just want to throw in 2 sentences about that. Like, if you are craft, one of the best things that can happen to you for on-premise is like getting in one of those specialty cocktails. And the problem with people that do specialty cocktails is they're seasonal.
Yes.
So, like, oh, congratulations. You have this amazing cocktail that features your product. 6 months later, maximum, it's going to be off the menu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
True. Work with every opportunity. Oh, yeah. That's working with people. I don't think there's enough of that. That's kind of that little bit of turning on a dime thing, too, where all of a sudden opportunities present themselves, and to not take advantage of them, unless you know that what's going to happen is going to come out poorly, I think it's a bad business decision not to.
Yeah, and my main thing that I meant with that one, and I should have added this to it. So part of it is, you have to do the research, then you have to do the things. That's a big part of it. just following up on those fucking opportunities. The number of opportunities that come into a lot of distilleries that just the ball gets dropped and no one follows up is fucking astounding. It's astounding. And not just from things that I've ever seen in the industry, but from other people I've talked to in the industry. And here's the crazy thing. This goes back to paying your distiller well, maybe letting your distiller have some sweat equity in the company so that they care a little bit more about the fate of the company. It's almost always the distillers that'll tell you those stories because they're the ones that are passionate about what's happening in that building, right? And the distillers become the face of the company, whether owners want them to be the face of the company or not. And so opportunities come to the distillers then pass it on to everyone else in the company. And then if nobody else in the company follows up on that, you know, where's it go? It just disappears. The number of opportunities that just fucking vaporize because no one will do the research and no one will do the things is fucking astounding.
I like
that is not exclusive to distilleries.
Yes.
Just gonna throw that out there.
Yes. Agreed.
It's 100% not exclusive to that. But
yeah,
it goes back to that.
agreed.
You got to be a good businessman as well as a good distiller thing.
Yeah, I paved the road. I started the car and heated the motherfucker up for you. Open the door, get in that bitch and drive. Just do it. It's not that hard. It's not.
You'd think so, but sometimes apparently. Cross market with breweries, wineries, and distilleries, and meaderies. Even you get this plays into that as well too, because that is all an opportunity where you can change things. And like I said, this to me, I haven't had very many bad combinations, but I have had some where you do a project with someone, but maybe behind the scenes you say we need to find a different way to alter this. You know what I mean? Like I've had that happen twice where I was like, oof, I don't know how you screwed it. Well, I think one was a maple bourbon, and I think it was a more than wet barrel. would be the way the flavor came across in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand. So, and here's what I would say about that too, because we've done this. I've done this a lot. So at Copper and Kings, we did a lot of barrel trades back and forth.
Yeah.
And I will be the first one to admit that if those decisions had been up to me, like I would have gladly have traded a lot of those brewers barrels or just given them barrels to cross market. Right? There were some beer barrel finishes that were trash. There really were, because it just doesn't work with great brandy in particular, in my opinion. And at Spirits of French Lick, I've been very, very careful about that because I do have the say so on that, right? But if I don't think that I want to find producers that I like, things that I would drink, right? So we work with Terre Haute Brewing Company. They have some stouts that I really, really like. And it just so happens that their stouts work really well as finishing barrels for our whiskeys. But more so than that, Matty Gladden works really well for their stout. So we trade barrels back and forth constantly and then cross market, right? It makes sense. Hive and Barrel Meadery. I love what Hive and Barrel does, and we've done some Hive and Barrel Meadery barrels, and I would like to do some more of those. So you want to find products that you like and that you want to drink, A, but B, because you're kind of putting your endorsement on it. B, if there's the bonus of your product would do well within a barrel that they've aged their product in, then even better. But if not, you can still certainly, trade out some barrels for something or whatever. We've worked with coffee companies in the past. They age their beans in the coffee barrels. I have yet to get a coffee barrel back that I was like, I'm going to put whiskey in this. But it doesn't matter because it enhanced their brand and enhanced our brand. With the coffee company in particular, Brickhouse Coffee, they're up in Indianapolis. Even if we don't have anything aging in a coffee barrel, we constantly have bags of beans either in the distillery or at the very least always in Indianapolis with our sticker that says Spirits of French Lick on it, and an establishment that otherwise does not sell alcohol. So
sorry, the hands where I can't type properly. So sorry.
How many of those glasses,
where are your hands?
How many of those glasses have you broken tonight? I'm just curious.
No, there's only one bottle that hopped off the shelf before. I think it's still alive. It may have survived the incident.
You got to pre-set up your drinking area, man. I got my water. I got about 9 bottles, depending on my move, right here.
I still
For
have
mood.
like 5 from last week out here from that. So I have a multitude of drinks on the table at the moment.
Yeah, so mine are still left over from my birthday. Where my girlfriend brought her fitting down here, and they were just like, "Let's find out what we both like." So
how did they do? Did they fare okay? Because I could see that leading into a big evening. Or a big day.
like her friend actually cut my birthday cake because she was surprisingly amazing at it. So, like,
Outstanding.
not too bad.
All right, and I think we're on number 10. Am I right?
I think so.
I think so.
Yes, sir.
Get great at speaking.
This
This is highly underrated. I get why you do it for distiller, but this applies to a lot of different people in the industry, not just the distiller. We had a discussion about this with PR people or reps in general that go out to places. If that's your job, some of these people went to college and have a communications degree, you would have thought they had talked to somebody in the last 18 to 20 years, and it does not seem that way. Now, I don't know. I think this is highly underrated with just general communication with people, and can be exemplified in the way you're using it. Sorry,
Yeah.
I rambled. Take that.
Fair enough, sir. No, I think if you don't believe in your story, or you can't make others believe that it's something that you're really into, then they're not ever going to believe in your story, right? I mean, Fonte is the single best fucking talker in this industry, without a doubt. He's phenomenal at what he does. But you can apply this to any of the distillers that have faces and can tell the story, or any of the salespeople that have faces and can tell the story. But you got to be able to convince people that you believe every single word that you are saying wholeheartedly. And honestly, if you're a good distiller and you're not hiding behind anything, every word that comes out of your mouth should be the truth, anyways. But this also falls into place with another part of this. This is the part that gets me. So if you have someone who's speaking who's not a distiller and is not intimately familiar with the process, they need to get intimately familiar with the process, because people want to know every single detail of everything that you do in a distillery at this point in time, right? And especially if you're anyone who really knows anything about distillation, you can pretty easily pick up on when someone's bullshitting you, and then the problem is, once somebody picks up on them being bullshitted, just like when they pick up a bottle they like, they're going to go tell all their friends that you're full of shit. And then they're going to go tell their friends that you're full of shit. So got to be able to convey that story, and it has to be truthful, and it can't just be straight up marketing. There has to be something to it that's legitimate. That's what works, especially for craft distillers, or even in the case of, I mentioned the Distillers Guild earlier. One of the big things that the Distillers Guild is going to focus on is the history of distilling in the state of Indiana, right? That's where I started to get decent at speaking about these things, and not when I'm doing that, cursing all the time, obviously, but actually being serious about it. Being able to tell that story of the history of distilling in the state of Indiana, because using that as an anchor, that's what the entirety of the future of distilling in the state of Indiana is going to be. And all the Distillers Guild members are going to have to be able to speak to that to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, a couple things. I definitely agree with everything you said, but with the making sure that people understand what they're talking about. I've been to a few shows, festivals, whatever, and there's always a couple that they're just hired talent, and they're not hired because they look like one of us. They're
Nope.
hired because they
don't look like one of us.
Exactly.
They're good looking. They look like Matthew McConaughey and other.
And not all of them are honest out front to say, hey, I'm here as a repping it. I don't really drink this, whatever. You have to really pry to get it out of them. That's one thing. I get it. You got to hire people, fine. But the other thing is when you have people that, as you talk about believing your story, they're believing a story that's not true, because they've either never taken the time to find out what that is, or
Yes.
even going further than that, there's the history of America is founded on folklore and wives' tales, and people get real grandiose in their retelling of all these stories, and it's happened a lot, especially the last several years in distilling, where there's truth, but then, hey, free marketing, let people just go, and then people just keep talking. And at what point do you reel it back in? And in some cases, it's an individual that stories are made up at, and another time it's an entire histories that are they're true at their core, but they're not true in how they're being retold. And the problem is that I think that hurts just as much as not knowing anything at all, because then you're like, okay, so this is just a bunch of shit. And some people will buy it because they're like, oh, this is absolutely. I mean, I know there's people that I'm sure think that Bob Dylan's actually distilling his whiskey himself, but thinking of the herd, we can get rid of those people.
I do agree with you on that, but I think that's where, like, the groups of friends come in, right, and then they call the bullshit out, right, and most of those companies that do that, most of them, not all of them, and we can think of a few that aren't, are going to be the bigger companies that already have the marketing dollars. But from the just business perspective, and I don't agree with people lying, obviously, I have a real issue with that amongst certain craft distillers, as I'm sure some of you know. But nobody also wants to see Dusty Rhodes come out and go, why the fuck am I wearing polka dots? Right? They don't want to see that. They want to see Dusty Rhodes believe in his polka dots. I mean, that's the best way I could really sum that up, I think.
That being said,
see, I forgot that train of thought thing was gone. I had someone
destroyed it. I agree with you, though, Mike, 100%. And here's the problem. Once you've done that, you can't fix it. No one will ever believe you again. Ever.
Well, no.
People will still buy your product, but they're not the people on the craft side. They're not the people. They're never going to buy your product anyways of your craft. But, the big companies don't care. They have the marketing dollars they can dump into that, and it'll be okay. I mean, I imagine that we can all think of brands that do that are on the bigger side of small. And then we can all imagine certain large corporations that would like to buy those companies. Right. So, and they will eventually.
Well, and we were talking about kind of like whiskey nerds sorting that out. My friend Matt, not the biggest whiskey nerd, but has been around a few tours we went on and some other things. And when we were at a festival, someone was pitching. I wasn't with him. Someone was pitching him on something. He goes, you wouldn't believe it was great. He started pitching me and all this and that. And then I started whittling him down question by question. He started getting a little sheepish as further and further as he went. And all of a sudden by question 8, like, yes, it's sourced. Yes.
I can't say his name or the name of the distillery that we were at, but another craft distiller was on a barrel pick with me at one of the big distilleries, and was looking at a craft setup that they had. I'll let that sink in for a minute. You guys obviously already know, I'm sure, but the tour guide clearly didn't know what she was talking about, and he point blank asked her about a modification to the still that this one was based on, and she goes, well, I can't really tell you that. And he looked at her dead in the eyes and he goes, can't tell me or don't fucking know. Yeah. Like even for me, I was like, holy fuck, that's harsh. But well played.
Was this before or after the barrel pick?
Before. Before any drinking happened.
Hopefully it got nice.
No.
But,
no.
So, right. So Kevin posted earlier, like stay home and out of the way. And I reposted, take the money and run. So I worked at a liquor store for a while, and they brought in tastings and stuff like that. And they had this gorgeous woman who would show up and host tastings, while I was there. And it would be, of course, you always have tastings during the slow hours. You don't want it to be like, 6 p.m. on a Friday when you're hosting a tasting. So like after you get stuff, it's just like, so what got you into, doing this? And, we'd end up talking, and it eventually devolved into like, what, like how much do they pay you and all this weird stuff. And she said in her contract, it was written how much she could weigh. So in my opinion, if something like that's written in your contract, F it. Take the money and run. Like, they have obviously very clearly said what they value out of you. Give them that and nothing else.
Imagine all these poor liquor store owners that are used to seeing these attractive people come in, and then here come my two guys, one from our sales team that we did have at one point in time, and the other one's our distributor, and they're like teeing it up for me to talk, and then they're looking around, they're just like, oh, well, where the fuck did he even he's fucking standing outside smoking, go get him. And then I walk in, they're like, I'm gonna have to buy something from this motherfucker because clearly he doesn't want to be here either. It's the most backwards sales pitch ever, but it works.
That's funny. All right. Well, I just realized that you've been on here for an hour and 20 minutes, and you and Mitch are in that lovely time zone east of us that makes it later than everyone else and what it should be. So that's terrible.
Yeah, both of them are.
Terrible. When are you guys gonna get on the central time zone? That's the way to be.
Pause
Right.
Dracula's daughter for this bullshit, guys.
I got up.
Right?
Yeah.
Like I could have slept through the night, but instead I'm here.
Hey, I'm 3 hours behind you guys right now.
He's
What are
going
you gonna
out
do
drinking
after
in a
this?
minute.
But no, I've stayed on Central Time the whole time I've been out here, so
Oh, well, that's no fun. But
it makes it easier to go back.
that's true. So I don't know, but Alan, thank you for coming on and discussing this, because I thought it was an interesting piece, and there's a lot of small, basically, and I'm going to say it comes down to lack of focus.
Mm-hmm.
Staying focused, or having the right people to stay focused on things. And that's difficult. I think that's difficult in any job. I made a plea for that recently myself. So
You gotta know what's happening in your company and what's happening with the market as well. Just stay on top of it. Just do the things. Like I said, just do the things.
very, very true. All right. Well, thank you everyone for stopping in the chat tonight and hanging out with us. Alan, thanks for being with us this evening.
Absolutely, guys.
Like we said earlier, David Levine from Whiskey in My Wedding Ring is joining the Bar Cart Co-op, and he'll be on September 9th. So stop in for that show, because we're going to get to know a little bit more about him and introduce it to him. And like we said earlier, he does out on social media have a barrel pick. So if you can find it, it was a single barrel.
It's out.
It's out? Oh, it's already sold out?
Sold out.
Oh, sorry. There was a couple cases earlier yesterday, so that's why I was leaning towards maybe that's still being available. So
Yeah,
my apologies,
someone's gonna have to find us some samples of that.
everyone. Maybe,
Mm.
but but make sure you stop and check out for that, because David is a very interesting guy, and I like a different name for the name of a show too. You know what I mean? It's not the standard YouTube show. So I like the name. So remember, everyone, it's not the size of the den that matters. It's the love of whiskey. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
What?